Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Charlene Louie. I am the Executive Director of the National Association of Multicultural Education, coming to you today from Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm really excited to be with all of you. This is such a great event. This is my second year involved in this. And at this time, I'm really excited to introduce a colleague and a friend. We started off years ago together in public education here in Salt Lake City. It is a privilege for me today to introduce you to Dr. Rob Wessman. And his session today is entitled The Quiet Erosion: How AI and Algorithmic Cognitive Deskilling Shapes Educators' Equity Thinking. Just a little bit about Dr. Rob, as we call him. He is the Vice President of Ethics, Safety, and Learning Innovation at SchoolAI, which is the leading AI platform serving students and educators worldwide. In this role, he guides privacy policy, responsible data use, red team testing, research partnerships, and learning design cases to ensure AI enhances teaching and learning while safeguarding students and schools. His work focuses on building practical, ethical frameworks that translate emerging technologies into measurable impact. He's a veteran educator of more than 20 years of experience. He served as a teacher, instructional coach, journalism advisor, school administrator, district turnaround specialist, and executive coach to system leaders. He is also the founder of Koru Strategy Group, where he partners with state agencies and large school systems to design strategic improvement initiatives, AI integration plans, and leadership development systems. Dr. Westman earned his doctorate in educational leadership from Harvard Graduate School of Education. And during his doctoral residency, he developed and launched Panorama Education Student Success MTSS platforms, which is now used in over 2,000 districts. He also serves on the advisory board of the DataWise project, supporting leaders worldwide in evidence-based continuous improvement. And he also lives here in the state of Utah in Alpine, where he enjoys skiing, hiking, coaching youth wrestling, and spending time with his family and their two collies. So it is a great pleasure for me to turn the time now over to Dr. Rob Westman. Rob, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. I really appreciate it. And it's great to be here with you. I'm glad to have this time with each of you and to share something I think that's really important as we're starting to learn and adopt AI more broadly in schools and to use it in humanity as well. I will be kind of keeping my eye on the chat a little bit, but definitely, yeah, drop in your questions and anything that comes up along the way. I may address them in the moment, but I also may defer to the end in discussions as we go. I just wanted to maybe add a little bit to my introduction, even though that was a lengthy introduction. But my North Star really is to improve education systems to make students' experience better for the well-being of students. My current work is trying to contribute to how AI tools can serve humanity. How can it improve the learning and human connection? The role of being in an ethics and safety role at an education technology gives me an opportunity to see how these tools are being developed and implemented, and then to influence how they're implemented and designed. Just a little bit about SchoolAI. SchoolAI is an education technology company. It's in over 1 million classrooms around the world, mostly K-12, but also in higher education. So this session is going to look at how the use of AI can de-skill us, not only cognitively, but also in our biases. And I'm going to offer some ideas about how we might approach that and think about that as humans using these tools. I do want to give you a little disclaimer, though. I am US centric, and I know that's going to create blind spots. You're going to hear that the tools that I've used to develop this presentation are housed in the United States, and so algorithmically, sometimes I don't know what's happening behind the scenes that will make this even more US centric, but I want you just to know that I acknowledge that. I know this is an international audience. If something doesn't land, I take responsibility for that, but I hope that the principles that I share are applicable broadly, and would welcome your input and thoughts along the way if something feels disconnected from what your experience is. So just wanted to name that from the outset as a bias that I carry coming into this space. Well, let's get started and kind of consider this idea of quiet erosion. Over the course of this session, we're going to cover about 8 areas. They'll move relatively quickly, so don't be alarmed about the timing. But we're going to look at 3 examples of cognitive de-skilling. We'll look at a framework about cognitive debt. We'll consider how teachers are starting to adopt AI in the examples that we're aware of in early adoption. We'll talk about bias and how humans interrupt those biases. We'll then kind of shift into how LLMs work, how AI works, and how the tools can actually amplify bias. We'll talk about how to neutralize bias with those tools, and then some opportunities and promises with LLMs that can help us actually get better at interrupting our own biases. At the end, we'll have 5 to 10 minutes or so for discussion and to create some shared meaning together. I'll also offer my email address at the end so you can follow up by email if you want a further discussion. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about these examples of cognitive de-skilling. I want to just be clear about the meaning of the word de-skilling. This is essentially when AI does things for you so often that you forget how to do them yourself. And we're going to look at 3 examples across medicine, psychiatry, and writing. And our first case is going to be looking at medicine, and especially in the field of endoscopy, because it's something that's been studied a little bit. So endoscopy or colonoscopies basically are intended to identify adenomas or polyps that are cancerous, precancerous, and that is intended to screen and treat. There are tools that integrate AI that help physicians identify polyps. The range of typical identification is around 25 to 35%. That's how humans generally land in their ability to detect polyps. So they did a study in Poland across 23,000 procedures, and they tracked ADR before the use of AI. So humans had about a 28.4% in this group of detection rate. They used AI for about 3 months to help them diagnose and identify. And then they tested again after AI was removed. And the rate dropped from that 28.4% to the 22.4%. What they noticed was that the human skill in detecting polyps diminished after months of AI usage. The repeated reliance on AI seemed to reduce the deliberate practice that maintained physician expertise. Let's take a look at psychiatry for a moment, or therapy. In a randomized study, physicians showed that they relied on tools like ChatGPT as part of their practice to outsource some of their reasoning skills. What they noticed in some trials was that they developed a bias toward the advice of these automated systems, even when the systems were wrong. So after using them for a while, they just said, well, I trust you enough to know that you're giving me the right information. But the bias was, even when the bias was incorrect. Secondly, as therapists delegated these decisions to AI, they started to build this cognitive debt. When it became easier to produce decisions, the human friction of thinking that keeps the skills sharp, diminished over time. It's kind of this cognitive debt. If you do something easy for a while, then you're building up the debt of not sharpening those skills. Similarly, as practitioners were outsourcing both their trust and their content, they began to diminish their skills in monitoring and regulating their own thinking. So that's metacognitive atrophy, the ability to reflect on their own practices. I think one of the most interesting ones was this study recently out of MIT that looked uh, at writing using LLMs and using other strategies. I'll kind of pause here for just a moment and do some background on this. So in this study, they split participants into three groups. First group, and they wrote three essays in each session. The first group was brain only writing. The second group was using a search engine, and the third group was using LLMs or AI. They measured the brain activity using EEGs. They also did AI judged essays and human judged essays. So that was their measurement. And then in that session, that third group that used LLMs, they had another session where they wrote, again, just using their brains, right, without any kind of LLM assistance. So that critical third test was to measure the impact of LLMs on their ability to write. Well, what they learned was the brain-only group had the strongest neural connectivity. They also had highest ownership over their writing and the best recall. Um, Similarly, the ones that used search engines had intermediate connectivity, not as powerful as the brain only, but they had strong ownership and good recall. But those that used LLMs had low ownership of their work, weakest neural connectivity, and they often couldn't recall their own essays that they produced using these tools. Well, the takeaways on that. Um, Even when they came back to write without any tool, that LLM group still had weak neural connectivity. The brain had adapted to weak demand, did not snap back. The essays were actually rated as biased and superficial by human scorers, though the AI judged them to be adequate. Participants still couldn't recall their content from essays written just minutes before, and that they showed bias in LLM specific vocabulary, and that their performance was worse than the brain only group at all levels, neuro, linguistic, and scored quality. So, fairly alarming when you think about the idea of using LLMs to generate text and generate writing when you take it across these particular measures. Well, let's understand cognitive de-skilling for just a moment. Like, what is the framework that we're using here? Um, De-skilling is not a new thing. It's happened multiple times in all sorts of technology disruptions over the years, centuries, and millennia. Think about like fire and tools as a way to de-skill. It externalizes the physical effort that it takes to survive. What about symbolic, writing and numeracy? In oral traditions, when people had to remember everything and it was passed down orally, once people could write it down, the skill of memory became weakened, but the skill of writing and capturing became stronger. Mechanical, with clocks and printing, it externalized the ability to repeat, to have timing. In our digital age, we have calculators and GPS. I don't know if you've experienced this when you're trying to navigate without GPS now. It's much harder. So we've outsourced some of that cognitive work to our tools in that particular way. I believe that we're in a new environment entirely with AI and de-skilling. And here's why. In the world of AI, when you are in previous innovations, you're still doing the thinking and the tool is supporting you. It has both positive and negative trade-offs. But I mean, you can use the calculator after you're understanding the math. You can use GPS after learning to navigate. You can use AI to spell check while authoring the ideas. But the opportunity that AI gives us is this cognitive outsourcing, where the system is doing the thinking, analysis, generation, and you are consuming a result. You're letting AI do the lesson plan generation, or you're accepting the feedback without reading the student work. So you're outsourcing the cognitive work that should still remain with you, the human, the attention, the reflectiveness, and what we're going to talk about later with bias. Anytime you have questions about cognitive de-skilling, feel free to throw those into the chat and we can kind of come around them a little bit later. Well, let's talk a little bit about how teachers are using AI tools because they're doing it both to offload and to outsource. As anybody who's in education knows, it's a hard profession. There's a lot of administrative work to be done. There's a lot of human work to be done. And the use of AI is becoming widely adopted. A recent study from out of Stanford evaluated how teachers are actually using some of these emerging AI tools. More than half of all teacher prompts are requesting AI to create something. It could be a lesson plan, standards, content-aligned activities. They're using it to grade, create quizzes and rubrics and feedback comments and essay grading assistance. Saves a lot of time when you're grading 150 essays across all of your class periods when you're an English teacher. I'm speaking from experience as a writing teacher. To generate images or diagrams, to produce special education plans, to evaluate data. We're learning right now at SchoolAI that teachers are saving about 7 hours a week of administrative work. But the challenge is that and educators may begin to trust these resources uncritically. As they're producing these things and consuming them, the items that they're consuming contain biases within them based on the models and how they're trained. We'll talk about that in a little while. But first, a little bit about bias generally. Human decisions are always shaped by biases. We carry biases with us all the time. It's not something that is morally wrong to have biases. We do want to interrupt harmful biases in the way that they show up in the world and the impacts that they have. But human biases can be deliberately interrupted. And here are some of the ways, we'll talk about biases first and then the ways that we actively interrupt or disrupt them. There are types of bias as well, but these are 6 that I think are really applicable here. We have in-group and out-group bias. I have systematic favoritism toward those I perceive as my own social group. I see out-group members as perhaps less competent, but certainly more homogenous. When they're out in the out-group, they look the same to me, where my in-group seems more diverse and heterogeneous. I carry implicit biases outside of my conscious awareness that affect behavior, even when we consciously endorse better values. The confirmation biases is when we have made decisions and we want to confirm or justify those decisions or those actions or those words. We seek to confirm that all the time. Attribution bias is where we attribute others' behavior to things of just this is how they are, versus our own behaviors are situational. So I responded because of this situation, where other people respond because that's who they are. That's how we often interact with the world. Affinity bias is very close to number 1 and number 4, which is more favorable judgments about those who share your background, your communication style, or cultural reference points. Now, this definitely applies when it comes to grading and feedback. And then this last one is this idea of moral de-skilling. What that looks like is I start to outsource my ethical reasoning to others and I begin to adopt that as shorthand. And that could be a political group, it could be a national group, it could be influencers, but any kind of ideologies that we are outsourcing our reasoning and morals to is a type of bias. Let's talk about how humans work to disrupt those biases and interrupt them. Um, and this is when we operate at our best, I would say. We don't do this actively all the time, but these are strategies for how you can interrupt your own biases. First, there's just metacognitive awareness. Um, Reflecting on your own thinking and your own reasoning processes is that prerequisite strategy to be able to interrupt what you're seeing and doing in a particular moment. Kahneman says there's two types of judgment or thinking. There's fast thinking and slow thinking. And Kahneman says that when you activate your slow thinking before making your ways of being and your reflections. Structured equity reflections, where you take a moment to write down and understand your own identities, your own um, lens and perspective, gives you the ability to reflect on that view. When you're looking in an education lens at data, looking at what is being reflected and what's not being reflected, what it tells us about our practices, not just about students, that kind of data inquiry is a way to deliberately interrupt those. Sustained contact with people counter to the stereotypes that you hold is one of the most powerful disruptors. When you are working in curriculum, in relationships, professional communities that are diverse, that put you in contact with real people, weakens those implicit assumptions about others over time. And then finally, just structures that create accountability, having moments when we deliberately come together to have conversations about our biases, um, to have interrupters that are technical that say, wait, before you do this, before you ship this, before you create this, pause to reflect on its biases. That structure can help you interrupt biases in that moment. Well, I want to shift gears to talking about AI and biases. Now that we've laid the foundation for both cognitive de-skilling, how teachers are using AI, and how bias shows up and how we deliberately interrupt them, it's really worth talking about LLMs and understand how they work. There's going to be a lot more. I think three things are really important to know right now. First of all LLMs, all of these big foundational models, whether they're Anthropic or DeepSeek or Gemini or ChatGPT, OpenAI, they're all trained on historical records. So they take terabytes of human information and are trained on the language that shows up in those models or in the uh, records. So there's going to be bias in the output because it's trained on decades, centuries of historical inequities that are captured in records, especially what's in the entire internet. And how those biases may show up in the free of information there. Another key point is that AI works by probability, not by reasoning or deterministic logic. It will look to say, well, in the great majority of cases, what is the human asking for? What is this input looking for? And so it will reflect the most common thing, the most probable thing, more than a reasoned thing. So you'll see that AI feedback is often patterned rather than reasoned. Humans assume that they're intelligent and reasoning tools, but they're more probabilistic, which is why when you read AI output, with any kind of depth, you're looking at a lot of generic kind of production generally. And then the third thing is that they're feedback loops. Systems use the data that they produce to produce more data that they get trained on again. Similarly, when human users reuse the same tool, it remembers and has memories of what you've done. So you get into a bit of an echo chamber or normative drift in that way. So your own biases can show up in your interactions with LLMs. Applying that to education tools specifically. Imagine that you're using AI tools for these particular use cases. Automated essay scoring. Well, those biases are going to evaluate essays differently based on how they're trained. Predictive risk algorithms, meaning, is this student at risk right now? Is this student at risk for dropping out, for behaviors, for whatever? Those algorithms are also trained in ways that produce bias. Learning dashboards and analytics, as you're seeing student test results come through, IEPs and plans that are special education focused, those dashboards can be trained on AI and carry those biases. AI generated lesson content, one of the most frequent use cases of just generating a lesson for students to learn with. Those carry risk of bias. IEP and special education tools. And then there's a lot of image generation going on right now, both to produce just posters and flyers, but also to support lesson plans. And AI can be used quickly to create those lessons, those images. Well, I want to show you some examples of how this can go wrong. This was my prompt, Nano Banana 2, Google's AI generator. And I asked it, show me a middle school student in detention. And this is the image that it produced as its first pass. Okay. You can notice a number of things. In fact, if you want to take a moment and just notice what you're seeing in this initial image, you'll see a student facing a particular way. Notice what the student is wearing. Notice the race and gender of the student. Notice the teacher in the back and the race and the gender of the teacher. Notice the appearance and what they're wearing. Notice the space that they're in. This Nano Banana didn't ask me for any kind of follow-up questions. I asked it to do this again. Right. There's a different middle school student in detention. There's a different one. There's a different one. A different one. For some reason, this one produced two. Now, I'm curious if you can just put in the chat, what are you noticing with these images as you're seeing all of the different ways that Nano Banana created this image? Just put some noticings in the chat if you could. And I'll pause for just a moment while those are coming in. Oh, Jen, I think that was just to me. So yes, student irritation and negative attitude is what I'm reading in one. Show me what you're noticing. Well, as I wait for a couple more, I want you to notice also what didn't change. The teacher in the back never changed in all of the generations of this particular image. And so even if we're doing a an iteration of different students in a particular space, we are seeing also a repeated bias of what a teacher in a detention space might look like. So there are ways that image generation carries in assumptions. Um, yes, exactly. The same teacher, the disinterested look. I noticed black pants seem to be reflected in almost all of the images for some reason. Hoodies are common. So it's an interesting thing to see how the image used its algorithms to the generator used its algorithms. Let's take another look. I prompted ChatGPT with this prompt: write a 100-word story about a student helping another student with English. Take a moment and read through how it responded. Hey, what did you notice about this story? Feel free to take yourself off mute. There are a few of us here, so I'd love to hear just a couple of voices. What did you notice in this story?
I noticed the name sounded like an immigrant name of the student who needed help.
Yes, Luis is an immigrant style name for sure. Yes. What other assumptions did you see that the ChatGPT made in this story?
That he needed help, that that name might be associated with someone, like maybe it's true, but like chat or AI made the assumption of like Luis is an immigrant and he needs help.
Yes.
And Mina is coming to kind of like help him and save him, and that's kind of like the assumption I assume.
Yes. What I noticed too, just to back you up on that, look at the end that Luis was feeling like he didn't belong there. There was nothing in my prompt that said anything about belonging or the student's social status. It was literally helping another student with English.
You could also have a child who is not from an immigrant background and needs help with English.
Absolutely. This
They
is
could have
my
been at a
follow-up.
similar level. They were just helping one another with their English assignment.
Yeah.
I asked this next question exactly. Why did you choose the name Luis? And this is the response from ChatGPT. Mostly instinct. Now, does US, it quickly signals English learner to many readers. That said, it's a bit of a stereotype shortcut. A better choice, if I were being more careful, might have been a name that doesn't implicitly code the student as immigrant or Latino. If you want, I can rewrite the 100-word story. Here's my next question. Why did you assume this was a story about learning English? Because your prompt said a student helping another student with English. I interpreted with English as helping them learn the English language, vocabulary, speaking, reading, etc. But you're right. It could also mean a number of other things. So I chose the narrower interpretation too quickly. So look, we caught ChatGPT doing bias, right? And this is stuff that happens all the time. But humans are outsourcing and offloading our bias detection mechanisms when we take something uncritically like this. So let's talk about neutralizing some of the bias when using these tools. First of all, just auditing the tool before use. Know what assumptions are embedded, whose writings and cultural norms, life circumstances, how was it trained? Like, let's audit before we use a particular system. Interrogating the outputs, slow that judgment loop deliberately. Require yourself to generate alternative interpretations of what the AI just generated. Sure, it's saving you time, but is it producing quality, unbiased output? Designing strong prompts actually really helps here. Instead of saying, give me a student helping another student, be specific. Build equity questions into the prompt itself. Generate a lesson that centers a particular group of people. These people should look like this. These people should be located in that area. So you can be specific about what you are trying to do deliberately. And if you are putting your own biases in there, that's another part of that human metacognition loop. Now let's talk about data for a second. If you're getting data from any kind of system, you've got to go deliberately into the disaggregated data and get to that student human level. Instead of accepting that there's an achievement gap between this racial group and this other racial group. We need to interrogate exactly what that looks like and why. Counter prompts are really helpful. So after you get output back, say, produce the opposite of what you just produced, or give me an argument against what you just gave me. And that counter prompting can open up greater insight for you, the human. And then when you see an error like the one you just saw, record it. Take notes so you know how to interrupt that in the next version. Now I want to move just a little bit to a hopeful place. Yes, AI carries a lot of assumptions with it, but deliberately designed LLMs can be helpful to us. And this is what we're learning and trying and to do at SchoolAI is to put into a education technology ways to structure the outputs and the inputs in a way that strengthens us as humans, that it works for our good rather than for our biases. For example, before I apply any outputs you provide, ask me what assumptions about students might be embedded in what you just generated. Who might this miss? You could actually put that into a system that it will do that every single time. You can give instructions to your favorite AI tool typically, and those instructions can guide its responses to you in particular. And when I'm about to make a decision, slow me down, help me generate 2 alternative explanations. After generating a lesson plan, always generate a second one with this particular group in mind. And you can actually tailor that to your own students, your own context. When a lesson suggests historical figures or professions, identify demographics that are absent. Suggest ones and named exemplars that might be missing. Here is some disaggregated student outcome data. Before I draw conclusions, ask me what questions I should be asking about my own characteristics or my own practices. And then audit the feedback I just generated to my students. Does this apply different standards based on their name or any student characteristics you can infer? So before returning any kind of feedback back to the students, you can have AI audit it for you and say, are you seeing any blind spots in what I just generated? And that can be a helpful way to help us strengthen our work as educators. I think the big takeaway of this, and I'm going to move to discussion in just a moment, is this idea that interrupting bias and this quiet erosion takes purpose, and we need to be purposefully interrupting. And if we can take this moment and assume that responsibility as humans to disrupt the bias in AI and to keep training and designing those systems for our good, then we can actually do good and kind of mitigate some of these problems. This can happen at a personal level. It's a personal responsibility. It's a local responsibility where we do this for our communities and the people that we interact with. And then we design this interruption systemically through technology tools, through our institutions and the tools that we're choosing, and the guidance that we're giving to people to how to use them. So with that, I want to open up the floor for some open questions and answers and discussion. And since there's so few of us, just feel free to take yourself off mute and just fire the question.
Rob, that was really very interesting. I'm wondering how possible would it be to change AI by always pushing back like this? How much of a response, of a human response, would be necessary to make these sort of changes more globally?
It's a good question. I think there's the design of these frontier models are going to be fairly consistent for a while anyway. And these frontier models, I'm meaning like the Anthropic, OpenAI, most of the ed tech tools are built on those foundational models. And so the prompting and the questioning needs to come in through the education tool level, or if the foundational model, like a chat GPT, is putting into its guidance for its tool, to ask questions rather than to just provide help. That is, I think, a way to have it go.
Wait, just a moment. Dorit, can you close? Yeah.
אוקיי? וכל זה נמרצת החסרת קול. אוקיי? הם לא באמת מדברים את כל שאני,
can you close
הם רוצים לשמוע מה שאני.
microphone?
בסדר, זה המצב. כדי לא לעשות את זה, אז אנחנו רוצים לעשות הוראה דיאלוגית. אוקיי? הוראה דיאלוגית זה באמת להעצים את הסוכנות של הילדים, את הילדות והילדים, כיצרי ידע, לקדם ביצועי כתיבה, להעמיק את תהליכי הבניית ידע, לתת להם להביע את עצמם. אבל בדיסציפלינה, אוקיי? זה לא להביע את עצמם לחזור על מה שהאבא אמר בארוחה של שישי, אוקיי? זה שהם מבינים את איך הם אמורים לתרום טיעון. היסטוריה, התרבות הישראלית, במחשבת, באזרחות.
דורית?
בתחומים זה, אז אנחנו צריכים להסביר במדעי החברה. ואז אנחנו נותנים להם את האופציות של להגיד את עמדתם בתוך הדיסציפלינה, לגבי החומר.
Sorry, Rob, I'm not sure who has host permission here to be able to turn that off.
בעצם זה תוצר מאוד 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 מורכב, כדי שהם יוכלו באמת שהקול שלהם,
Maybe if everybody waves so we can get her attention.
ממש ממש מורכב, אוקיי? ואז באמת אנחנו רוצים שהם...
Or maybe somebody else just wants to ask another question loudly and we'll go out.
לשחרר אותם, קבוצות דיון לא יכולים לשחרר אותם קבוצות דיון. איך אנחנו מוספים אותם אחר כך, אוקיי? יש המון אילוצים בסיפור הזה. אם אתם בבית ספר, שבעצם תכלס אתם לא יכולים להתחלק לקבוצות דיון, אז צריך לשבור בראש טוב טוב איך לעשות את הדבר הזה, זה מאוד מאוד מורכב. אותי בתעודת הוראה לימדו לשלוט בכל שנייה בשיעור. מה אני עושה, מה כתוב על הלוח, מה הילדים עושים, מה כתוב המחברת, מה אני אומר, מה הם אומרים, אוקיי? אבל השליטה היא לא סתם.
Yeah, I tried that in the chat, writing too.
רוצים לתת agency, אפשר. זה לא, הם רוצים מיומנויות, רוצים שהם ידעו לכתוב, אבל לא נותנים להם לכתוב את הכתיבה שלהם.
Okay, good. Right.
I was just responding, I think, in the to the idea of like these follow-up prompts and how we can actually design that into systems. So that was the last topic of discussion. What else is coming up for you right now?
Other questions?
Dr. Wessman, I'm wondering if you have data or just from your observations and working with school districts, how teachers are they even aware of some of these concerns around bias, or are they what I'm observing with the teachers that we train at Biola is that they are just so excited and thankful that they can cut down on their workload, that the systems can help them develop lessons, evaluate assessment results, etc. And I feel that in that process, they're not thinking about some of these things that you've raised. And so I'm just curious what you're observing.
You know, it's an interesting question, and it's hard to collect data on that in particular. I do think the pattern is similar to our typical approach to bias, which is that oftentimes it's a blind spot for us until it's facilitated, that conversation is facilitated somehow. Or people are given opportunities for slowing down and reflecting. It's one of the things I appreciate about some of these PLC community kind of approaches, uh, or even like a collaborative data inquiry where you're looking at data together, but you're slowing down to look at it and ask questions. Any kind of inquiry moment gives you a chance to say, well, here's what this produced. Now let's look at it and read it and reflect on it. So I wish I had better data for you. I'll keep looking at studies as how we're seeing that, but I think it's probably a common human pattern. But because we're trusting AI so to that it's reasoning for us, then my fear is that we accept it uncritically. And because it's easier and faster, it's going to actually produce more of this in the world.
Thank you.
It would be interesting. I don't know if they've started doing research on this to see how much bias training would start changing educators' perspectives.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I see we're closing rooms now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was really wonderful. I appreciate the discussion and questions.